Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and caffeine addict. And today we are checking out the next part of Luton's Domain of Chaos. This is one of his most popular videos, and I can see why, because the Domain of Chaos is wild. So, let's get into it.
The god Nurgle, however, is far less subtle than Tzeetch in how it draws its power. For Nurgle bathes and wallows in the agony, indeed the abject misery, of others' physical corruptions. Disease, plague, and galactic pandemics are its dominion. Nurgle is...
Okay, so things are getting kind of Nurgle-y here in our reality.
As a god is often regarded as the god of all, because few mortal creatures seem able to escape physical corruption at one time or another. And whereas the other Chaos gods usually align with specific individuals or those inclined to a certain activity or behavioural pattern, there is no discrimination with Nurgle. Nurgle also has...
No, it's true. Almost every living thing is going to end up becoming diseased or experiencing illness at some point in its life. Of course, the weird thing to think about is that if you are, say, a bacteria, like let's say you're a cholera germ, right? Does a cholera germ get diseases? Probably not. It's a single-celled organism, but it's still an organism. And so what is it that affects, like what is the Nurglite plague on a cholera germ? Or is that thing like the pure essence of Nurgle? What's even weirder to think about is when you have non-life pestilence. This would be things like radiation or poisoning. Do those count as Nurglite? Also, the question of gray area stuff. And this would be like a virus, right? A virus isn't really alive. It doesn't meet the definition for life, but it has life-like qualities in how it replicates and spreads. But because it can't perform its functions independently, it needs a host, it needs host cells, then a virus isn't really alive.
Has a more active role in the plight of mortals than the other gods, in that those afflicted by disease or...
Yeah, and when you're in the warp, can you get sick? Like, can a Khornite space marine in the warp get a case of the sniffles?
Some nightmarishly disfiguring corruption are often then subsequently shunned, exiled and ostracised by their own communities, leaving them in painfully hopeless situations, depressing misery, often having been turned on by everyone they may have imagined would help them in their time of need. They find themselves turning to dark whispers, to Nurgle, who will then perhaps most disturbingly not cure them from their diseased and disfigured state as compensation for their spiritual devotion. If anything, their condition may often be exacerbated, but instead it will allow them to permanently live on in their unfortunately abhorrent condition, to remain as a horrific parody of their former selves, with some minor benefits. That being a relative state of physical relief. Most followers of Nurgle seem totally unaware their physical condition should be causing them levels of pain and discomfort that would make any normal being want to collapse and be put to death right there and then.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting too that, not every disease is accompanied with pain and discomfort, at first at least. In fact, that's one of the things that makes many diseases very dangerous. Like the health event we're dealing with now, in which the danger is that the individuals who are infected may not exhibit symptoms and instead can simply spread it simply by going about their daily lives, which adds a level of severity to this condition. And so it makes sense then that Nurgle's gift would be the ability to ignore or not experience your symptoms of your disease, which of course makes you an even better vector.
This rotting of Nurgle and bloating of the body often also enables them to physically endure more damage and trauma, making the followers of Nurgle more difficult to physically dispose of. The followers of Nurgle are almost universally extremely unpleasant forms to look upon or be in the immediate vicinity of. As with their pain, they are seemingly oblivious to the horrific appearance they display to others. Perhaps most disturbingly of all, though, beyond the physical, is that worshippers of Nurgle are afflicted with an ongoing permanent state of depression but one that simultaneously brings them contradicting pleasure and satisfaction. Nurgle essentially is a disgusting perversion of mortality, deceiving its followers into a denial of their true self and distorting their perspective of reality. It's quite literally an abhorrent rot of the physical and mental self.
Yeah, interesting. It's almost like some sort of Warhammer 40k-ified version of depression more generally, in which, in lieu of feeling extremes of emotion, everything feels muted and dulled, and you sort of lose the ability to take that initiative on your own, right? It's extremely un-Tzeetch-like, right? Tzeetch would be the god of when you experience a wrong or something that you find unpleasant, you want to take considerable action to change it, right? The god of twisting and turning of fates, right? In contrast, Nurgle seems like the god of acceptance, the god of when a bad thing happens, you simply slow down, you simply decay, you become demoralized, and you want to do less and less and less. And the more bad things happen to you, the harder and harder it is to fight against them, right? In a way, Nurgle might be the ultimate embodiment of chaos in that way, in the sense that chaos simply wants to just exterminate all life in the galaxy.
The Death Guard, the 14th Space Marine Legion, are most associated with Nurgle. Mortarion, the Primarch of the Death Guard, would become a Demon Prince of Chaos, and other powerful Marines like Typhus, a captain, would become devastating champions. Which then brings us conveniently to another god which revels in perversion and distortion of reality, the god of pleasure, Slaanesh. Slaanesh has had an ongoing...
I love how Luton has the mysterious chanting right in the background, which if it wasn't paired with ominous violins would be the sort of music you might play when you're getting a massage or for aromatherapy.
Going surplus of strength ever since it was birthed at the horrific cataclysm that was the near total annihilation of the Eldar race and the shattering of their gods by Slaanesh, all brought about through their own excessively decadent and hedonistic ways. Slaanesh has a somewhat more neutral attitude toward the other three Chaos gods, as its attention is considerably more focused upon indulging its own pleasures, as is its nature. Its main opposing god, though, is Khorne, as Khorne represents violence, pain, war, and through these things ultimately death, whereas Slaanesh is much more about sustaining, for as long as possible, pleasure, pain, beyond description and estimation. To end all of this early through a bloody slaughter is counterproductive to how Slaanesh gains strength. While the previous three gods are abhorrent to humanity and Xenos alike, Slaanesh is arguably the darkest of all the gods, which is not always apparent at first glance.
Yeah, interesting, because the other ones sound pretty dark.
To be held in near perpetual states of unimaginable psychological torture, to have pleasure senses dragged and extracted to levels which could be so intense as to be painful, it's a depraved entity that revels in not simply hedonistic pleasures, but prolonging all of these to the extreme. The 3rd Space Marine Legion, the Emperor's Children, are the most notable followers of Slaanesh, and
Is that Space Marine wielding a pipe wrench? Why? Why would a Space Marine carry a pipe wrench as a weapon? You're a Space Marine. You're a Space Marine in Chaos. You have an unlimited number of weapons, none of which need to be giant pipe wrenches.
Best simply described as hedonistic psychopaths. Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children, would also become a powerful demon prince. The strength of all the Chaos Gods comes not from the most extreme acts defined by their characters, it's the very opposite. For you see, whilst a great many acts and tidal waves of emotional horror and depravity at one time would birth the gods themselves, it is the inevitability of mortal conditions that sustains and fuels them. For Khorne, endless physical conflict is as old as the mortal realm. It never ceases, it never calms, the struggle between mortals is eternal. With Tzeetch, the endless instability of mortal affairs leads to endless change and struggles for power. Nurgle, the god of all, is strengthened continuously by the inevitable decay, misery and death that occurs constantly throughout the galaxy. As for Slaanesh, in its simplest and most innocent form, it is only the pursuit of happiness and to better oneself. But following further down this path leads to corrupting desire, that little by little eating away at a mortal desire from the inside, to gain a little bit more pleasure each time. Indeed, perhaps the happiness and pleasure is gained not even by the end result, but maybe in the acts themselves, requiring them to be a little bit more each time. It is a creature that is fueled by the latent inability of mortals to be content. Glory.
Yeah, this is interesting because it sort of draws this false dichotomy that says, oh, well, they're going to exist no matter what, so therefore we shouldn't even try to fight them, right? Even the Emperor, it seems like correctly realized that you can't just accept that, hey, these gods are always going to exist, so why even try? And that's sort of, unfortunately, what the 40k universe seems to have settled on is, well, they're going to always exist, so we're just going to keep fighting recklessly and pursuing our schemes and greed and all of it at a universal scale. But like everything else, right, Khorne need not be as big as he is, though he will always exist, right? Instead, you can scale it down, right? You would be able to scale down the power of Khorne through, well, reducing the amount of wars you have. Even things like signing a peace treaty with the Tau, signing a peace treaty with the Eldar, anything is going to reduce the power of Khorne to manipulate the universe, right? Even somehow finding some sort of consensus with the Orks, which may not be possible, but you know what I mean, right? And so the idea that we should just passively accept that these chaos gods are going to exist, so why even try to self-police behaviors, is ridiculous.
Glory, wealth.
But it's a really common logical fallacy that many, many people subscribe to. A lot of anti-climate change rhetoric has actually transitioned suddenly. It went from climate change doesn't exist to now climate change is inevitable and there's no reason to try to mitigate it. But in fact, every mitigation effort will pay some level of dividend, though not all mitigation efforts are equally valuable.
Success, physical desires, all of these lead down a path to Slaanesh, where only damnation awaits. Through the ever-changing shift of power in the Great Game, one of the gods may become dominant over the others for a time. Their absolute goal is to have total domination over the Imperium, a goal which by the very nature of their own limitations is essentially unattainable. So they and the warp being that it is their dominion is in a state of endless chaos. If one of the gods ascends to a position of dominance over the others, then the weaker forces may temporarily not so much ally as more work together toward the same goal of toppling the most powerful god at the time, to perhaps simply not pay more attention to the others and then later return to endless power plays as they fight each other to claim their position of dominance. Warp storms that periodically sweep the Imperium.
I mean, I think that may even be ascribing too much agency to some of these sort of disembodied forces, right? Simply put, if God X is the largest single god in the Imperium, then by definition, if you were just randomly shooting at things, more of your bullets will hit that largest target, right? And so there may be like a spiritual equivalent to that says simply that if you can crowd out, say a large increase in the power of Khorne may simply just crowd out like Tzeetch's ability to mess with Slaanesh, right? It may just be that your easiest and most plentiful targets are all Khorne because he's so big, right? And that will, of course, help to restore him down to the equilibria where everyone is screwing with everyone all of the time.
A direct result of the Chaos Gods battling each other in their ethereal planes. Armies of demons may battle each other within the warp or the mortal galaxy as they vie for control to inflict relative damage to the power of the other gods. These ongoing wars between the powers are endless cycles of repeating conflict, temporary cooperation, backstabbing, betrayal, and corrupt conspiracy and exploitation of any sensed weakness and opportunism. Humanity and
I wouldn't even be surprised if we as human beings use those words like backstabbing, betrayal, to add a human face to what are basically lightly directed forces, right? Where at the end of the day, it's not because, it wouldn't be because, Tzeetch stabbed Slaanesh in the back at the moment of their triumph over Khorne. Like, no, of course not. It's just that Khorne was shrinking and Slaanesh was growing, and so it was easier to take shots at Slaanesh.
In races such as the Eldar love to bathe in the...
But human beings do this all the time, right? This is why we're like, our toaster's pretty finicky today. But it's like, no, the toaster doesn't have a feeling. It doesn't get finicky one day. It's just a mechanical device that, for a clearly inexplainable mechanical reason, isn't functioning well.
Their own egotistical self-importance, and so the endless skirmishes, incursions and conflicts within the forces of chaos to them must feel like a directed and focused effort from their chaos gods to ruin and obliterate them. In truth, these battles are far from a concerted effort by the chaos powers to destroy the mortal races. In fact, these engagements are really more like spillage, the splashes and bleedings that exude from the far more severe and ongoing struggle between the gods themselves in the Imperium.
Except for the Black Crusades, which are deliberate, organized efforts. This is the part of Warhammer 40k lore that drives me nuts, is that you say something is true, but then you immediately contradict it.
With all of that said, there are periods where, for the briefest of moments, the Chaos Gods will turn their eye to the mortal real space and pierce it with a plan of evil consciousness. These moments of attention for the gods can represent devastating battles for survival for mortal civilizations. An opportunistic warp opening here, a summoned possession there, these gateways will often unleash a host of demons of whichever power first became aware of the opportunity. It's demons lavishing the chance to slaughter and or corrupt the mortal vessels that await them across whatever plane they happen to find themselves upon. On the rare occasion that the powers sense something has dangerously allied against them, or a force has risen that poses a genuine threat to their existence, this is when you may see the most dangerous of allegiances, known as Chaos Undivided. It's fairly self-explanatory, and considering that even at the worst of times in the ordinary galaxy the ongoing problems of chaos are only a small amount of their attention, you can barely imagine the danger and threat that the combined forces and attentions of the Chaos Gods represents. As mentioned, the rise of the Emperor was one such occasion, and it nearly led to the entire destruction of humanity. However, as soon as such matters are resolved, the gods will immediately use that momentary lapse to attempt to exploit the others. This in part explains why at the end of the Horus Heresy, the forces of the traitorous Space Marines of Chaos were so quick to flee, collapse and retreat. It seems fair to assume that...
Yeah, it's true militarily. In the real world, you often see militaries that are designed to conquer territory do an absolutely terrible job of holding them, because they're sort of contradictory goals. Right? The idea of seizing territory from other armed enemy requires speed, firepower, decisive action, and the ability to continuously communicate and coordinate your forces, right, and operate them quickly over great distances. In contrast, right, holding territory requires something a little different. It requires a tremendous amount of efficiency. It requires a level of steady, consistent discipline, and it requires a level of discernment, right? The ability not just to over-rely on firepower, and instead to rely on things like diplomacy or very tactical applications of force. Because, of course, holding territory is valueless if you destroy that territory.
With the death of Horus and the near-fatal wounding of the Emperor to the point he became a far more ineffective entity for mankind, the gods of chaos likely snapped their attention back towards their own conflicts in the warp and away from the trivial conclusion of the devastating heresy war during the period of scouring. All of this brings us to a fairly common question though. Why are there no positive gods in the Imperium? If a sentient being's emotions and desires, as well as their general conscious or unconscious feelings, form the entities within the warp, then it stands to logical reason you would surely see positive creations, as well as these very negative ones, correct? This is generally speaking best marked as one of those things we could class as poorly defined or just not well understood. We know that there are lesser entities out there in the warp, and that it's reasonable to assume that they are just relatively unapparent or smothered by the presence of more powerful chaos gods. Some of course even going so far as to speculate that the Emperor himself is potentially a positive godlike creature. He has
his own demons. Sorry, saints.
After all, an anathema to the Chaos Gods, it also raises further questions like, do the Chaos Gods truly represent darkness and evil, or is that a subjective human definition? The Chaos God Tzeentch, for example, revels in change and disruption, and whilst it's true you can make a connection of change and disruption being a negative thing, another view would be that it simply represents an opposing position of order and stability. Do we attach automatically the concept of evil to this?
Okay, this is actually yet one of the points that I think is really important, that Tzeentch, the idea of order, or the idea of change as opposed to order, it's really important to understand that doing nothing is sometimes a choice for dramatic change just as much as a choice for taking action. An example might be the sinking of the Titanic, right? Imagine you're on the Titanic and the boat begins to sink. You're in your cabin, you feel it start to lurch. Now you have the orderly thing to do is to do nothing, to remain in your cabin and wait for an evacuation order or wait to be told what to do. Of course, that choice, we know, will produce a dramatic change to your state of being. Namely, you will be cold, wet, and then drowned. And so doing nothing, taking the orderly, unchanging, little c conservative route, is going to produce a dramatic change. Right? So you might as well take the Tzeentch route of leaving your cabin, finding a lifeboat. And this, I think, is something that a lot of people forget. I think of it as being the classic put your head in the sand is sometimes how it's expressed. The idea that change is inevitable, nothing is permanent or fixed or sustainable forever, right? And so people believe that doing nothing or remaining fixed in place will preserve the status quo indefinitely. But in fact, often preserving the status quo is impossible, and it's about managing and guiding change. So Tzeentch, to me, is the closest thing other than perhaps the Emperor, but even the Emperor, right? You see, if the Emperor is the god of order, and he's empowered through the rigid, fixed nature of the Imperium, in which all change is impossible, right? The Emperor is made strong and powerful through that, but we watch the Imperium of Man year by year decays further and further. They have less and less technology. They have less and less creativity. They can deal with their challenges using fewer and fewer methods and have less and less flexibility. And that is the ultimate fate of someone who clings so hard to order, is the rapid decay. So again, to me, Tzeentch is, again, not a good god, but embodies some of the best of civilization, right? That's the nature of it. Civilizations are always changing. They never stay static.
It's true that within the Chaos Pantheon, their followers and wars cause devastating suffering, but arguably no more than any other race in the far future. And humanity itself is no beacon of purity and innocence when it comes to such things. It's worth remembering as well that without the depraved selfishness, violence, and all the worst traits of mortal races, the Chaos Gods wouldn't even exist. So it's hard when you really think about it to ascribe that they are mindlessly evil. If anything, the Chaos Gods are a reflection of mortals as they peer into the ocean of the warp with their souls. With so much of what occurs in the galaxy of the far future, humanity will and has always attached unobjective, even irrational emotions and fears to events or individuals.
Oh man, this is why Luton's one of the best. He gets it. He gets it. Human beings really want to believe that, the sunrise is a function of the sun god being pleased, and only through pleasing the sun god will we continue to ensure the sun rises, right? We ascribe all this personality, and when it's a cloudy day and you can't see the sun, it's because the sun god is upset, right? We upset him somehow. And this sort of this focus on me, right? I, we, us human beings, surely the sun god's pleasure or displeasure with us is all important, right? And we are so important to the sun god that he takes time to show us whether or not he is pleased. And that is, of course, human beings doing two things, which is making themselves the center of the universe, which everyone does, and two, ascribing human-like qualities to natural processes that have nothing to do with human beings, or nothing to do with living beings at all.
It's what enables them to be perceived as being fundamentally good or bad. The Xenos race of the Orks are a good example, often seen by humans to be foul, war-hungry, yes, even evil creatures bent on mindless destruction, brutal horrors, carnage, and slaughter without end. But with further study, we know this not to be exclusively true. Orks are not evil because they're not driven by some higher premeditated grand plan. They operate by design and instinct, and within that you could also include the Tyranids, who operate with much of the same core drives. Depending how far along you want to go with this, it can become significantly complicated and very philosophical. Ultimately, we view things with a human point of view, but the key thing to understand is that chaos is not as simple as it being bleak, darkness, or evil. That is a humanistic projection overlaid onto it. In some respects, elements of the Chaos Gods and what they represent are actually positives, depending on your point of reference. And in saying this, I can feel Imperial Inquisitors heading my way with increasing urgency. Truly though, this is where things are slightly contentious. It's never to my knowledge expressly explained about the morality or the positive-negative aspects of the Chaos Gods. There are subjective interpretations and quotations, and arguably it's just a matter of perception. We could, for example, look from an Orc's perspective. A god like Khorne, that is a concentrated expression of violence and bloodlust, would not look dark, evil and abhorrent. For an Orc, Khorne would look pretty positive, appealing, energizing even. Now of course, were it not for the fact that Orcs...
I mean, it's also true that Khorne is the god of honor, and of fighting for what you believe in, and standing up against injustice, right? Khorne is the god of righteous anger, and perhaps he's most empowered by its most extreme expression, violence, right? Literally like the killing, but he may be the god of all those things.
Have their own gods, Gork and Mork, and would never have any interest in following or worshipping chaos. On the other side of the coin, to some ordinary, non-superhuman citizens, extreme violence, bloodlust and death is perhaps shockingly not so positive or appealing. Are the Chaos Gods truly evil, or do they simply represent a balance of combined expression, where from a human perspective the negative aspects are much more pronounced? Khorne, for example, is known by some to also represent honour and courage. Tzeetch, while change can be a negative, can be a positive.
As we discussed.
Nurgle, while in this time undoubtedly it's slanted more towards horrific plague and mutation, yet it also to one degree can be about rebirth and even salvation.
I mean, also it's fair to say that the death and decay is an essential part of life, right? A life force that never slows or decays is I mean, in some ways it's a disease, right? But even diseases run through a cycle, right? Plagues begin and end. And look at all the things and ideas and civilizations that have justifiably and perhaps for the good of all human beings gone away, right? The institution of feudalism, for example. We don't really have feudal states anymore, and that's probably okay, right? Owning people who work your land in exchange for not starving is like a really pretty inhumane system. And so the fact that it grew, blossomed, reached its peak in the Middle Ages, and then began to decay, literally, thanks to a plague, is, of course, a symbol of the goodness of Nurgle. The idea that all things will pass on eventually is a source of tremendous hope.
And Slaanesh, while all about dark and hedonistic excesses, is also about life and positive experiences, albeit for yourself. Some few would even go so far as to suggest that Slaanesh can represent love. I would imagine this to be more of an all-consuming love, though, that makes someone behave dangerously and irrationally, but love nonetheless.
I mean, the fact that there's no god of love seems sort of silly to me.
Chaos,
unless, again, it's something that's like subdivided, and you have like love of violence, right? Or like, is Khorne the love that makes you abuse your spouse? Is Tzeetch the love that makes you manipulate someone into being with you? Is obviously, Slaanesh the love that drives you sort of like mad with lust, right? So maybe we have this singular idea of love, but it never actually coalesces into a single god because it keeps getting partitioned off because people are horrible.
and the Chaos Gods can be not only about destruction and horror, but about the exploration of the further realms of experience. They are the edge of the expanse of consciousness and exist beyond the limits of human imagination.
Yeah, that would make the most sense, honestly.
To this end, can you ever really say you would understand such beings or be able to comprehend what they could offer,
If you watch the last video, I talk about this at length.
what they could show you, or how this would alter your perception? I think, to quote another explorer beyond the mortal world, the Chaos Gods and their domains are seen as demons to some, angels to others.
Whew, yeah, that is wild. All right, I think we're going to pause it there, actually. This seems like a logical break point, and man, the domain of chaos is something else. But I think it's probably one of my favorite parts of Warhammer 40k because it's such a good vehicle to ask these sort of questions. What does it mean to be good and bad? What does it mean to do right and wrong? What does it mean to ascribe agency to a natural force? And of course, how do we understand the world that we navigate in, right? Where does virtue stop and vice begin? And understanding these answers, I think, is one of the most important steps to enable you to really empathize with, here in the real world, with people you don't understand, right? And once you see things through that lens, then you can, you can start to connect with them, to understand on a real level how they're operating. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching. Be sure, check it out. We have launched a Discord. Discord is down below. Absolutely, you should come and join. It's really fun. We have a ton of entertaining stuff going on. We have a meme channel. We have painting, art, gaming, Team Fortress 2, weird stuff, you name it. It's a great time, and we want everybody to come hang out. I'm there almost every day. So yeah, also check out the merch store, right? I've got all my Warhammer 40k parody shirts, plus new Combat Veteran Gaming stuff, so it's definitely worth checking that out as well. And yeah, I think that's all I had. I will see you guys next time.